The War of 1812 today. We previously discussed some of the causes of the War of 1812, the harassment from the British, convincing the Native Americans to attack Americans on the frontier and arming them, and then the impressment on the open seas, and then general abuse of American traders around the world. The War of 1812 was really a naval war. Most of the battles were at sea, on the Great Lakes, or near the ocean or the Great Lakes, as you can see, which you would think we'd have no chance because the British have such a strong and powerful navy. However, the British were spread so thinly around the world fighting different wars that it did give us a chance to defend our home country. The American Navy is small, but our sailors are well trained. Our commanders and captains know what they're doing. Our smaller, more portable boats were effective against the British, but we just simply did not have enough boats to make a huge impact against the British on the ocean that would stop their blockade. On the Canadian border, it was kind of back and forth. We tried to invade Canada, and it failed. The British tried to invade down through Detroit, and it failed through the Great Lakes. And where they were stopped was at the Battle of Lake Erie. We tried to attack up through Canada from Detroit, but the British came back down with their boats through the Great Lakes, and Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry stopped the British advance through the Great Lakes at the Battle of Lake Erie. Commodore Perry was a strong leader. He actually had his men build the boats for the battle, and when his boat was sinking within the battle, he jumped on a rowboat and went to another boat to continue the fight. He would not give up. He was a very determined American. Further inland, Governor Harrison was defeating the Native Americans in the Shawnee. We talked about that previously, him and Tecumseh and some of the other battles they had. So the Native Americans are going to be a big loser in this area, and the British advance will also be stopped. So the Americans have a lot of success around the Great Lakes. Farther south, the Native Americans are losing there as well. In a separate war, which is kind of within the War of 1812, the Creek Indians fight to save their territory in Georgia and Alabama, but they were defeated badly by a young general named Andrew Jackson. They were forced to find the Treaty of Fort Jackson, where they would give up millions of acres of land through southern Georgia and central Alabama, basically destroying the Creek Empire and culture and tribe. The British will soon and shortly be able to have more fighting power because they had defeated Napoleon in Europe. They bring their fighters over to America, and they do an all-out attack up the Chesapeake Bay. They win the Battle of Bladensburg and then descend upon Washington, D.C., our capital. With little resistance, they walk into Washington, burn the White House to the ground along with other important buildings, send our government on the run, and at this point it's looking like the British are going to win and maybe retake America for themselves once again. However, shortly thereafter, an attack on Baltimore, they are stopped at Fort McHenry in fierce fighting. The fort held up from a bombardment of British cannon fire, which will inspire the Star-Spangled Banner. This stops the British advance up the East Coast, and it makes the British realize that they don't really want to fight anymore. They're tired of fighting, and they ask to start negotiating a peace treaty. Meanwhile, while all this is going on and they're negotiating peace in Europe, they're negotiating the Treaty of Ghent, which will end the war, the news hasn't spread down to the Gulf Coast, so the fighting continues. And at the Battle of New Orleans, the British try to take over the Americans' most important seaport at New Orleans. However, they're at a geographical disadvantage as they stand out in their redcoats in the swamps of southern Louisiana with little cover and with the swamps slowing them down. The Americans take the high ground of the forts at New Orleans, and under Andrew Jackson's leadership, they annihilate the British at New Orleans, killing and wounding to over 2,000, while only 70 Americans are wounded or killed. This makes Andrew Jackson a national hero and celebrity overnight, and is a huge victory for the Americans, but it's technically a victory that was not needed as the war was already over. However, the victory did give Americans a big boost in pride, and a feeling of nationalism as they defeat the British in such a decisive manner in the last battle of the war. The effects of the War of 1812, they signed the Treaty of Ghent, and really the whole war was pretty much pointless. The war was, the Treaty of Ghent basically just restored the borders to where they were before. Between Britain and the United States, no one gained any territory. Although the war is technically a tie, it does boost American morale and also shows that America is here to stay, as we stood up to Britain once again, and showed that America would be a powerful country throughout the 1800s. It boosted our manufacturing and also gave the rise to Andrew Jackson, which would lead to him being a president. The big losers of the war were the Native Americans. The Creeks and Shawnee, among many other tribes, lost millions of acres of land, and suffered devastating defeat to the American Army in the Southeast and in the Ohio Valley. All right, that ends the War of 1812.